You're under arrest, Reno.
You talking to me, Marshal?
Your name's Reno, isn't it?
All right, Marshal, what do you say I done?
You don't remember me, do you?
No.
When you hang a man, you better look at him. Don't go for that gun, Reno. I need you alive.
This is Dueling Pistols, where history draws first and legends never die. No fluff, no filters, just raw stories of grit, blood, and legacy. Triggered by Black Flag.
You know who else are Freemasons? Henry Seymour and William Heston.
Which are who?
Oh, Brian, you know them. The guys who made Quaker Oats.
Were they?
Yeah, they were both Freemasons. Do you know why? Do you know why they named it Quaker Oats? Because neither of them were actually Quakers.
No.
Brian, is just because it was a symbol of good quality and honest value.
So they were named Quaker Oats just because
the Quakers were
they
dope.
figured if they use that, they immediately have some cachet.
They basically were like, the Quakers got this like
image.
They've got this reputation of being solid, badass, blah, blah. So we're going to steal it.
All right, welcome back to the show. I am your host, Brian Call, and I'm joined tonight by my brother, Brent Call. How are you, Brent?
I'm well, thank you.
All right, we're back to Boone. It's our last episode, I think.
You started off with such confidence.
Yeah.
This is the last
one. I think we're going to wrap it up. We're deep into Boone, Daniel Boone's biography. This is the book called Boone, A Biography, written by Robert Morgan. And we've been combing our way through it, and it's been great. I highly encourage you to go and support the author by buying this book. Get it on Audible or buy the paperback like what I have. The story, we've skipped a bunch of it. You'll want to go back, I think, and if you've enjoyed this and get the whole thing. There's all kinds of tidbits in here. Where we left off, though, was a sad and prideful moment in what shall we say, a weakness in Boone's leadership and character. He's getting ready to, they're kind of being drawn out. Simon Girty had sort of tried to take everyone out at Bryan Station, and then after they left, all the local forts and stuff gathered together, formed a militia, and like 150 guys are on their way to try to attack these Indians. But there's some estimates of nearly 500 Indians ahead of them, and the militia doesn't really know how many there are, and the stories are mixed. But if you missed the last episode, go back and check that out. Basically, we're in the middle of them, the militiamen charging after the Indians.
They're
crossing a river in a tight little spot, on a shallow spot, get to the other side, and now all hell is about to break loose. I'll start where I left off last. It says, "It is a peculiar fact that in most battles, each participant remembers events in a different way. The reason is that in the heat of action, each sees a part of the field and never has the leisure to survey the whole. Frightened, excited, disoriented, a soldier may have a particular impression that is often a distortion. The Battle of the Blue Licks was no exception. Every man who was there and survived told a somewhat different version of events. The battle, once it began, unfolded quick." Okay. Almost all versions agree that Boone's company advanced farthest up the hill into the woods along the first ravine, firing as they moved forward. According to Levi Todd, they covered nearly 100 yards of ground after dismounting. Later, when Boone studied the battle, he decided that the Indians had pulled back in front of him and his men to draw them into the trap of a ravine. It is possible Girty or Caldwell and the Indians had targeted Boone in particular, perhaps hoping to take him prisoner. As Boone led his men on foot up the flank of the hill, an Indian rose from behind a stump and Boone raised his gun. Boone was carrying a special fowling piece that he had loaded with extra powder and several bullets as well as buckshot, appropriate for fighting at close range. Before he pulled the trigger, he said to the gun, "You be there," as though giving an order, and after the blast, the Indian fell dead. Can you imagine having guns that are somewhat unreliable? And you're like, okay, you be there. Like, this time, gun, you need to work for me. You know? And,
no, thank you.
And boom, it worked. He later told his son Nathan that, quote, he was only positive of having killed this one Indian in his long life. Boone and his company pushed ahead, firing and reloading, and the Indians retreated in front of them. It appeared to Boone's men from Fayette County that they were winning the battle. The advantage the Kentucky settlers usually had over the Indians was their long rifles. Indians were more often armed with British muskets, which were far from accurate. Under the right conditions, Kentuckians could kill Indians while out of range of all but the luckiest musket fire. But at the Blue Licks, the militia advanced so close to the Indians in the brush and trees, they lost that superiority.
Ugh.
A musket could be reloaded quicker than a rifle, and the Indians had tomahawks and war clubs, while the Kentuckians lacked bayonets and swords that could have been effective in close hand-to-hand fighting. It appears almost certain the Indian forces fell back before Boone's company, hoping to draw them further into the woods and cut off their retreat. Riding his horse near the middle of the line, Colonel John Todd was hit in the left chest and fell soon after the battle started. The early loss of their leader likely shook the confidence of the advancing men. The fire from the brush was so intense and the scream of bullets so sickening, McGary's line began to crumble. Men fired at the Indians and tried to reload in the smoke and confusion. Powder horns and bullet pouches dropped in the weeds and were lost. Bullets seemed to come from every direction, and so many fell that the rest panicked and started to back away, trying to recall where they had left their horses. Indians suddenly rushed at them, swinging tomahawks, painted in the colors of war, red and black, their faces black as fiends from a nightmare. Indians sprang from every bush and bank of weeds, every briar patch and triangle of honeysuckle vines, and came tearing down the slope, screaming at the limit of their breath and slashing with tomahawks and war clubs. For once, the Long Knives did not have their long knives. The men from Lincoln County had nothing to swing but their empty rifles, and many had their heads bashed in with tomahawks as they turned to dash for their horses. Warriors advanced, shooting from rocks and stumps, ditches, and buffalo wallows. Those in the center of the field who looked to the right would have seen that things had gone terribly wrong, even worse at the flank. Leading his men up the slope toward the woods at the top of the hill, Colonel Trigg had ignored the steep ridge on his right, jutting between his company and the river. Assuming the Indians were hiding straight ahead, Trigg and his company were astounded when a thundering fire broke out from the sumac bushes and shrubs on the razor-backed ridge. It is possible more than half the Indian forces were concealed on that ridge, for the firing was so heavy from that direction that most of Trigg's men and Trigg himself were killed in minutes.
It's a buffalo wallow.
Yeah.
It's pretty big.
Yeah.
A lot bigger than I thought it was going to be. That's disgusting, though. I'm sorry. There's got to be better hiding places.
It is possible more than half the Indian forces were concealed on that ridge because it was so intense, and Trigg's men and Trigg himself were killed in minutes. No other company took such extreme losses so quickly. I mean, if you got 200 guns on that ridge and all the dudes run out in the wide open and you're at that close range, I mean, the whole thing's just stupid. All of it, from top to bottom. You did no research, no reconnaissance, no reconnoitering, nothing. You just went across and charged in. It's like, while they were set up, prepared, ready. I mean, just how stupid do people have to be? If I were Boone, I'd be stupidly ashamed too. And they all did it because of their ego. Because it was all this, you're a coward. No, you're a coward. No, you're timid.
I heard a great quote the other day. A person is smart. People are dumb and scared and frightful.
Yeah. Beware whenever you're in a group, mobs, gangs, groups of people, not a good thing. Not trustworthy. Especially an angry mob, an angry group. Groups do heinous things because they're in a group. And all accountability then gets shifted like, well, I didn't do it. I was just there. And stupid things happen. And everybody just starts going along. And human beings, man, giving into a crowd is like giving into, like, people would rather lie to get along than stick to what they know is true and defy a crowd. And it's only the rare person that has the character and the drive to stand for some principles in the face or within a group or a mob. So yeah, not a good thing. It says that so Todd is dead, Trigg is dead. So you have McGarry and Boone left. As far as we know, McGarry's not dead yet. No sooner had the Indians hidden in the brush along the ridge delivered their deadly fire than they sprang out swinging tomahawks and clubs, killing survivors of the first fire, taking scalps and prisoners for later torture. But it was not just scalps and prisoners the Indians were after, for just down the slope stood as many as 180 horses already saddled and bridled. Blankets and provisions, extra lead and powder, as well as booty such as knives and pistols were tied to the saddles or hidden in the saddlebags. Many of the horses brought into Kentucky by settlers were small breeds from Virginia and North Carolina, ancestors of the quarter horse. They were tough and quick and dependable. Few trophies of war were more valuable than captured horses. Luckily for the panicked and stumbling Kentuckians, many braves were more intent on seizing horses than taking scalps. Scores of Indians poured out of the thickets to grab the horses. Swinging their rifles as clubs, some of the militia tried to resist, but they were outnumbered and overwhelmed. Those who were able began to run toward the river. In the confusion of the firing, the screams and war whoops, smoke and smell of blood, the horses panicked too and ran back and forth and down the long slope toward the river. Indians pursued in a general stampede of horses, militia, and wounded toward the ford across the river. Seeing they were cut off on the right and behind them, the men with McGarry in the middle ran to the left to get behind Boone's company. Boone was with his son Israel, nephews Samuel, Squire, and Thomas Boone, Abraham, Peter, and Joseph Scholl, and other family members and friends. He was still moving forward, firing and reloading. As Indians withdrew before them toward the hilltop and the second ravine, Boone's calm authority kept his men organized and concentrating on the advance. They were not even aware of what had happened on their right and behind them. Boone's authority as a leader was never demonstrated more clearly. Boone and his men were astonished when McGarry rode up behind them and yelled, "Boone, why are you not retreating?" It was only then that Boone looked across the slope and saw that Trigg and Todd and the two other companies had been swept away. The field behind them was a pandemonium of men scrambling to catch and mount horses, Indians clubbing and scalping, wounded men trying to reach the river, others attempting to wade or swim across. Indians on horses rode around, tomahawking and trampling men, cutting them off at the water's edge. Indians and white men wrestled in the river, thrashing and screaming. It appeared that most of the senior officers, except Boone and McGarry and Levi Todd, had been killed.
So there's like basically nobody left.
Todd got shot in the left breast, but I guess he's not dead. Said he got shot.
Someone got shot in the left breast, and it said that they
It
died.
was Todd. Let me go back here. It was Todd's first mistake was to place his men higher ground, concealed by the trees. All accounts. It says,
You had Todd Boone, and what was the other guy's name?
Colonel John Todd was hit in the left chest and fell soon after the battle started. Yeah, that's what I thought. So it says, it said, Indians and white men wrestled in the river, thrashing and screaming. It appeared that most of the senior officers, except Boone, McGarry, and Levi Todd.
Oh, it's a different Todd. There's Levi Todd, and the other guy is a different Todd. It didn't say Levi, did it? Say John Todd?
Oh. There's too many John
Todds.
Todd. Yeah, John Todd. Colonel John Todd was hit. So Levi Todd is still alive. John Todd dead. Levi Todd. So which one
I don't know.
taunted McGarry? Because it's karma that it would be John.
Yeah.
Gosh, I'm paying it. It's hard enough to pay attention to the last names or the first name. Anyway, so those three senior officers were still alive. Realizing that they had no choice and that his company had been drawn dangerously forward, far beyond any safe retreat, Boone shouted to his men to run to the left into the trees. Farther down the ridge, the Licking River entered a gorge. If they could reach the river in that direction, they might be able to swim across to the safety of the woods on the south bank. Some would later say the battle lasted only 5 minutes, but other accounts would describe the action as occurring in about 15 minutes. In any case, it all happened very quickly. Men who could catch a horse, any horse, mounted and rode for their lives. Those who could not find a horse ran toward the river, dodging Indians, hoping to dodge bullets, tomahawks, and scalping knives. We were obliged to retreat, was Boone's cool understatement to Filson a year later. Filson is the one who wrote the main, most, the biggest book about Boone that kind of sparked all the rest to follow. When McGarry reached them, Boone and his men were about 3/4 of a mile from the river. Luckily, many of the Indians were intent on grabbing horses, taking scalps and booty, and few noticed Boone's men fleeing to the left. As he backed away, facing the chaos of the battlefield, guarding his men as they retreated, Boone saw his son Israel nearby. Seizing a horse that belonged to his brother Ned's widow, he ordered Israel to mount and get away. "Father, I won't leave you," Israel answered. Looking around for another mount for himself, Boone heard a thud behind him and wheeled to see Israel knocked to the ground by a bullet in his heart. Bleeding from the mouth and already dying, Boone's instinct was to pick up his son and carry him toward the river, but it was too late to do anything but leave the body and mount the horse himself and get away. Later accounts that blamed McGarry for the plunge into battle may have been intended to divert attention from the mistakes made by Todd and Trigg. The decision to advance over a half mile of open ground uphill below a sharp parallel ridge on the right. Like I said, dude, can you pick any worse variables than what they decided to strode into? Like, come on, man. You deserve to be shot. Like, for real.
Yeah.
I just don't understand when people go through, and this isn't, you can read about things like this in history. And there's some sort of madness that sometimes, like, couldn't they predict the gravity of a situation? Perhaps weigh it out. Look at like it goes like when you're hunting an animal, right? You could play it so conservative that it's almost a guarantee that you will achieve success. Or you can gamble your ass off and maybe get it or maybe blow it on a stock, basically. You can take 2 or 3 days and make sure it happens. Or you can, like,
roll the dice.
Let's just cut over here and go over here. Maybe the winner, but we'll probably get them.
Yeah.
And that lack of patience, that lack of, like, experience and the hesitation, like, being in a situation where you, like, I keep saying this, the paranoid survive. Being the person that's, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? That sort of mentality, you don't want it to freeze your decision making, right? But it's a process of being paranoid so that you are prepared for each of those scenarios in case they come, or paranoid enough that you can foresee scenarios that are out ahead of you so you can avoid them or sidestep them, But he's just going through the list here. Of what was it? All the mistakes. Mm-hmm. It says
like a quarter mile of open ground.
Yeah, later accounts that blamed McGarry for the plunge into battle may have been intended to divert attention from the mistakes made by Todd and Trigg. The decision to advance over a half a mile of open ground uphill below a sharp parallel ridge on the right toward a concealed enemy at least twice the size of the Kentucky force ensured disaster.
What I don't get is they know there's twice as many people.
They didn't necessarily. Remember, no one had really seen the Indians. but they knew there were a lot.
Yeah.
And Boone said he thought they might have been concealing how many. So instead of 500, there was 200, 250, half as many, 300. Still, the arrogance. The arrogance.
That's what it feels like.
Ego. In the book Ego is the Enemy, which I did a podcast on years ago, the other show, there's multiple examples of war and ego, Civil War examples in the book where they take specific, because this is such a prime example of like catastrophic errors that take place. War is kind of the ultimate stakes of all the things that can go wrong, and how ego so often undermines and destroy and is what causes the fall of the loss of a battle is ego, Anyway, it goes on to say, Todd failed by not scouting and probing the enemy to find out its location and numbers. Trigg, a recent arrival in Kentucky with the Land Commission, had almost no fighting experience. No one, including Boone, later wanted to blame the dead colonels. There is no recorded instance of Boone blaming McGarry. According to his family, Boone blamed himself and George Rogers Clark, commander of the Kentucky militia, who maintained his garrison in Louisville, too far away to protect the Bluegrass region. Around 77 Kentuckians were killed that day. 15 of the 25 officers were killed, including John Todd, Colonel Stephen Trigg, Major Silas Harlan, and Major Edward Bulger. Boone later said that of all the terrible things he had witnessed in his life, the death of Israel was the worst. Tears came to his eyes whenever he mentioned the battle. He felt responsible for the disaster at the Blue Licks, and he blamed himself for bringing Israel along when he was not yet completely recovered from a fever. Father used to be deeply affected, even to tears, when he spoke of the Blue Licks' defeat and the death of his son Nathan told Draper. Boone and his company, those who were left, reassembled downstream on the south bank of the river. Upstream, where the main body of the militia was, men already across the river turned to cover those still struggling to cross. Some Indians kept up the attack right to the edge of the river and into it. Boone later decided it was the early loss of their leaders that made the men panic. Nathan Boone explained that to Draper years later. Benjamin Netherland, one of the mounted militiamen, had already gotten across the river, though he had fought in a number of battles in the Revolution, including Guilford Courthouse. Netherland was rumored to be something of a coward. At the Blue Licks, however, instead of riding away to safety, he turned his horse and ordered the fleeing men to stop and cover those struggling to cross behind them. "Let's halt, boys, and give them a fire," Netherland shouted. As many as 20 fleeing militiamen stopped to fire at the pursuing Indians and thereby saved many of their comrades. A half-century later, Captain Robert Patterson would commend Netherland, saying, "I cannot ever forget the part you acted in the Battle of the Blue Licks." Aaron Reynolds, who had been scolded by Patterson earlier for cursing and then given a quart of whiskey for desisting, saved Patterson that day by seizing a horse and putting the wounded Patterson in the saddle and sending him across the river to safety. Reynolds planned to swim the river himself, but his buckskin pants were soaked and heavy, and he sat down to take them off. While he was seated, Indians grabbed him, made him a prisoner, then left him under a single guard while the fight continued. Noticing that the guarding Indian's rifle was not primed to fire, Reynolds knocked him out with his fists and escaped.
Ha! I was going to say, he got caught with his pants down, but he redeemed himself there in the end.
Wearing only his shirt, Reynolds swam the river and ran all the way to Bryan Station to tell what had happened.
Ah, that's great. Just flapping in the wind.
You feel a little vulnerable with those things sticking out, or feral. I mean, one of the two.
I don't
Depends
know.
how your attitude is.
Depends if you got to run through underbrush or not.
It's funny because he saved Patterson by giving him a horse, but then when he tried to get over there, he's trying to take his pants off and got nabbed. But they didn't kill him. They tried to hold him as a prisoner. That's wild. Like, there's a bit of, that's lucky. That's some lucky stuff.
For real, they weren't making much prisoners of everybody else.
Captain Patterson soon arrived on horseback and confirmed his story.
He took his hand off.
In gratitude, the captain awarded him 200 acres of land, and the once foul-mouthed Reynolds, he was the swearer.
Yeah, the swearer.
Settled down to become a Baptist and a farmer. It was said the story illustrated the good a well-placed gift of whiskey can do. That afternoon and evening, the Indians had an orgy of amusement and torture with the wounded and prisoners taken at the Blue Licks. The bodies were later found with their hands tied, the skin cut, and burned in the long hours of torture. One prisoner who later escaped, Jesse Yoakum, said he did not know how many they burned, but the smell of human was the awfulest smell he ever smelled in his life. The British officers later claimed they discouraged the torture but were unable to do much about it. Men fleeing from the disaster at the Blue Licks met Logan's larger army advancing from Bryan's Station. Logan deployed his men to fight, expecting the Indians to pursue the retreating militia, but the Indians did not appear. They were busy scalping and torturing the prisoners and wounded back at the lower Blue Licks.
Jeez.
Sadistic. The Blue Licks was the last major battle of the American Revolution, and it was a horrifying defeat for the Americans. In the aftermath of the battle, the people of Kentucky were stunned. Many packed up their belongings to head back east. How many did they say died? 75?
Something like that.
That's about half.
Yeah, almost half. I think there was like 185 men total.
Yeah. A lot of, they got their butts kicked. One man offered his whole farm for a horse on which to carry his family away. Lawrence offered my father the whole 1,400 acres of his preemption, where Lawrence's station then was, for one little black horse to carry his family back to Virginia. It's funny how quickly your priorities change. Sarah Graham told John Dabney Shane, George Rogers Clark blamed the officers who were in charge there. The conduct of those unfortunate gents was extremely reprehensible, he wrote. As overall commander of forces in Kentucky, Clark said he had primarily intended for officers such as Todd and Trigg to patrol along the Ohio River on the lookout for invading Indians. Instead, they had set a large army. They had led a large army reach Bryan's Station with no warning and then played into an obvious ambush. He's not happy with how they performed. They're dead now, though.
Yeah.
So. They blamed the militia's weapons and style of fighting, bad judgment of the officers, no bayonets. Campbell wrote on October 3rd, 1782, all our late defeats have been through neglect of these weapons and want of proper authority and capacity in the commanding officers. Never was the lives of so many valuable men lost more shamefully than in the late action of the 19th of August, and that not a little through the vain and seditious expressions of Major McGeary. McGary's going to be blamed for a lot of this. He's the one that just said, let's go. Shut up. You're all cowards. McGary himself defended his actions at the Blue Licks, writing to Benjamin Logan that though his bad conduct was blamed for the defeat, the charge was being made by officers who rushed to confront the Indians without waiting for Logan's larger force. McGary said Colonels Todd and Trigg were for immediate pursuit, alleging that if they waited for Colonel Logan, he would bear off the laurels of victory. Ego. McGary got in trouble for this. Hugh McGary was disliked by many who knew him, and John Mason Peck described McGary to Man Butler. He was a fractious, ill-tempered man, hated by the people, and constantly engaged in fights and affrays. He followed the current of migration towards the Green River Country, but the people would not associate with him. But he defended himself and blamed others. Todd and Trigg were responsible for the massacre. After such a disaster, there's a lot of blame to go around. And though Boone's name is rarely mentioned in any of the recriminations, Boone did not let himself off so easily. He knew that losing his temper when snarled at by McGary was a serious failure of leadership at a critical moment. That his outburst was so uncharacteristic of him made the episode all the stranger and more painful. All his life, he had shown calm, good sense in moments of danger. Boone's relative Abraham Scholl, who was with the company from Boone Station at the battle, said Boone, quote, rather blamed himself in some degrees for the Blue Licks battle. For the rest of his life, Boone broke down and wept when he mentioned the battle. It was the greatest failure of his life. It was the occasion when his capacity for clear-headedness deserted him. His son Israel and 76 others had been killed as a result of his lapse. He may never have completely trusted himself again. The battle marked the end of the most important period of his life. In the years after the battle, stories circulated that Israel had been urged to get up from his sickbed to join the pursuit of the Indians. Boone bore the weight of that guilt because he had let his son go when he wasn't well. In some versions of the story, Boone had shamed his son into going. I'm sorry to think I raised a timid son, he said. Many years later, Boone's granddaughter, Delinda Boone Craig, said it was Boone's insistence that made him so ashamed the rest of his life. Israel ought not to have gone and would not but for his chiding, she said. But Olive Van Bibber, who is Nathan's wife, maintained just the opposite. She told Draper that Boone had tried to dissuade Israel from joining the militia that pursued the Indians to the Blue Licks. Israel had long been sick previously and had recovered nearly so, leaving him with a stiff neck, and his father and family tried all they could to persuade him not to go, but he would go.
That sounds more like
it to me as well.
The man's already lost a son. Horrifically lost a son.
Yeah, and Boone also is not one for war.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's like, let's sidestep this if at all possible. This
at
doesn't
every opportunity
serve too many people too well. That also sounds like, I think Olive Van Bibber is much closer to Boone than these other voices that are chiming in. But it says there are conflicting stories about where Boone buried his son Israel. Some biographers say he returned to the Blue Licks, found the body, which was so badly eaten by animals and birds and bloated by the heat as to be unrecognizable except for a piece of clothing or its location in a thicket. Nathan said that Boone returned to the Blue Licks a few days later with a burial party and dug a separate grave for Israel there. Still, others report that Israel's body was thrown into a mass grave with the other bodies that were found mutilated and decaying. All accounts agree that Boone returned to the scene of the battle with the burial party. As they approached the site, they saw buzzards circling over the river and hillside. Animals were gnawing at the scattered bodies. Fish had partially eaten things like Israel's bodies lying in the sun were so bloated and partly torn by scalping Indians and animals, almost none could be identified. Yeah, I mean, they were just mostly already destroyed. I mean, it's August.
Yeah, and there's animals
in Kentucky,
and it's hot.
Yeah, the bodies were laid in a sinkhole across the hilltop. They threw dirt and stuff over them. The Battle of the Blue Licks has always been rightly described as a terrible defeat for the Kentuckians and the American cause. Few seem to have realized that it was also something of a failure for Girty and the British and their Indian allies also. If the plan had been to draw all the Kentucky militias, including Logan's 400 men, into the ambush and kill them in one complete victory, that would drive the settlers out of Kentucky forever, then it was at best a partial victory. Because Todd and perhaps McGarry plunged directly into battle, Logan's larger force was saved, and the forts and stations in Kentucky were saved. Had Todd waited until Logan arrived, many more may have been killed, and the Kentucky militia might have lost the battle. The hundreds of Indians firing from the thickets could well have changed the course of American history in the Ohio Valley. As he lived with his bereavement and disappointment with himself, Boone did not neglect his duties as colonel of the Fayette County Militia. With John Todd dead, he was now in command, a full colonel and country lieutenant. Boone wrote letters to officials back in Virginia describing the recent battle and explaining the desperate needs of the frontier communities. It was simply too dangerous a place to raise a family. The dreams of prosperity and plenty were apparently coming to an end. It says on September 2nd, 1782, a force of Indians, so this is about a month later, roughly. About a month later, a force of Indians attacked, maybe not even a month, Kincleo Station in Jefferson County and killed or captured 37 people. The party of 150 Indians paused with the prisoners near Jephthah's Knob. Jephthah's. As if waiting for the county militia to attack them, but with the example of the Blue Licks ambush fresh in mind and only 54 men at his disposal, John Floyd wisely refused to attack. The Indians and their prisoners retreated to the Ohio River.
Smart move there, Floyd.
Floyd's been smart the whole time.
Yep.
But
Which is funny because I think of Dumb and Dumber every time you say it.
Boone believed that much of the problem was that the defense of the Kentucky settlements was under the leadership of George Rogers Clark, far away in Louisville. You remember how he didn't like that, you're just stationed too far, in this fortress, but you're not doing us any good as our, protector. On October 1782, about a month later after that, Boone and other officers of the county militia began to assemble a large expeditionary force to be led by General Rogers Clark in a campaign against the Shawnee towns in Ohio. More than 1,100 men were mustered, and they crossed the Ohio River on November 1st, 2 days before the British signed the preliminary peace agreement with the Americans.
Dang.
The Indians may not have known for certain, yet they were losing their British allies at Detroit. Colin C. Calloway tells us that when they did learn the peace terms, they would feel betrayed. Indian speakers in council after council expressed their anger and disbelief that their British allies had betrayed them and handed their lands over to the American and Spanish enemies. Now the Indians are screwed because they sided with the British, many of them, to beat the Americans, and now the British are saying, "Yep, we're out. You guys can have this land." Which I think there's global pressures at play as well, because you have France doing its thing to England, and there was such a fight going on. But what does that do? It left the Indians now having made themselves enemy, but their main provider of weapons and leadership and all that just abandoned them. So now what? Americans are pissed.
They're left there holding the bag.
It says there had been more Wyandots than any other nation in the Indian force of the Blue Licks, but the Kentucky militia did not attempt to march north to the Wyandotte villages between the Sandusky rivers, Cuyahoga. They didn't encounter a lot of resistance, and they killed only 20 Indians before they returned to Kentucky. It looks like they kind of start roaming around and just kind of killing Indians here and there and little skirmishes, and it's starting to wind down. It would be 12 more years before the Shawnees and the Miamis would finally be defeated by Mad Anthony Wayne at Fallen Timbers near Toledo on August 20th, 1794. 12 years and 1 day after the defeat at the Blue Licks, Wayne, having studied Indian tactics at the Blue Licks and elsewhere, told his men to approach the Indians hidden in the brush and fallen trees of a hurricane-leveled forest. Let the Shawnees and Miamis fire at them, then rush them with bayonets and swords while the Indians were trying to reload among the tangled limbs and trunks, and the cavalry prevented them from fleeing. This time, the Long Knives used their long knives. The tactic worked, and the Shawnees and Miamis were soundly defeated. After the return from Ohio, Boone and a group of men from Boone Station, including Will Hayes and Flanders Calloway, camped for several days at the mouth of Limestone Creek. The mouth of the Limestone Creek, where is a fine harbor for boats coming down the Ohio, now a common landing. It Instead of brooding on loss and his mistakes, it was better to plan to move on to new opportunities. Basically, Boone is kind of just, it's winding down. Things are different. He's looking around and he's like, yeah, I don't want to be here anymore. It was Boone's habit and his destiny to keep moving toward a future of risk and unlimited potential. Simon Kenton already had a station near Limestone Creek, and the business of land surveying and trading was booming, especially now that the Shawnees had moved farther to the north. At the temporary home on Marble Creek, Boone would later choose Limestone as the place where he would establish himself and his extended family. So we're kind of coming to the end of that period that was Boone's wild life. You know, those years that he was known for the most famous things that he did. And he gets to this point in his life. He's getting older, right? He's been some places. He's seen some things. He never quite gets wealthy. Never does. He just isn't built for it. He's super famous. Many authors write about him. And the book goes into some fascinating detail, which I encourage you to go back and read, where Boone could do a lot of these things and you'd know him as a footnote in history, but you wouldn't really know it the way we know it today, or how we see the West, how we see the frontier, I should say, in early America and the Revolutionary War is a lot through the books that were written about Boone while he was still alive, by the way. And then the books that sprang off of those books and those books. And what you learn the details of how he couldn't really keep land or money. How it seemed to me that he mostly wanted to just be an outdoorsman and see new places and experience the wilds. He's frustrated as a city kid, as a city guy. He's frustrated in areas of legal activity and ownership and all that kind of stuff. Didn't go well. And as a result, he, there's some crazy stories because he gets robbed, he loses land, he gets accused of being a thief, he gets accused of swindling people. At the same time, he becomes massively famous and popular. People back east and in other countries are reading about Daniel Boone. He's like a heroic figure. And how those books are written and what they sparked in the psyche of people at the time, it's all worth reading. So I recommend you go and you read it and you learn more about it. But suffice it to say, he's not super rich, not rich at all. And he kind of seems to be content with simple things, but he's frustrated. He is frustrated that he doesn't own. He's always trying to figure out how to pay the bills. You know, he's one of those guys. Yet he's wickedly famous, like stupid famous. And so here you have this thing, and it's kind of interesting. I've said this many times. Fame does not equal fortune.
Not even close.
Sometimes, often it does. But just because you're famous doesn't mean you make a living off of that. Look at some ex-athlete who's a legend, you know. You could pick, I remember there's been a number of athletes that were legendary and are broke as a joke, you know. Never did make much money after their athlete days. They're poor as can be, and yet they're still famous. They can still get on shows, and yet they still can't seem to make $1. And I think, you know, like I said, fame and money and wealth building don't necessarily go hand in hand. And I think people who are extremely like creative, like Boone, and talented in the outdoors, it's hard for them to, he seeks adventure. It's hard for him to think about, you know, settling down, and the whole idea of it doesn't seem to suit him. So we're going to skip all of that. I say go and read it, check it out. You'll want to. And I'm going to get here toward the end of Boone's life, and we're going to wrap up. We're going to wrap up this series. I'm going to start here. It says, in the fall of 1817, Boone went hunting again. 1817. Okay. I believe he died 1820.
3.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So he's 70s, I believe.
He's old.
It says, this time he went hunting with his grandson, James. He had hunted every fall since he was big enough to throw a spear or swing a club. He and James wandered up the Missouri, and the old man was exhilarated to be in the woods again. A duck landed by their campfire, as though offering itself for their breakfast, but the cold began to tell on the old man's joints, and they turned back after a few days. Yet his urge to hunt was as great as it had ever been, Nathan told Draper. My father said he was naturally inclined each fall to go hunting and trapping, as the farmer is in spring to set about putting in his crops. In the years after Rebecca's death, Boone never kept house himself, but moved from Nathan's house to Jemima's, to Daniel Morgan's, and then Jesse's. Jesse had arrived from Kentucky in 1816, but primarily Boone lived with Jemima in Flanders Callaway near Rebecca's grave. I'm skipping a lot of stuff, and I really think some of the chapters about Rebecca and Daniel Boone in their old age, like from like 60 to 70, is pretty fascinating to read, and you should read it. I thought it was really interesting. He gets pretty severe arthritis. Boone does, like debilitating, crippling arthritis. Ugh. And it sort of plagues him in his older age, and it's like rheumatoid. It comes and goes, though. There are times when he's fairly functional, and other times when he's so wrecked he can't do anything. So there had to be some kind of autoimmune thing going on, I would assume, with this arthritis that would flare up, come and go. And I think they figured out things he could eat. Can't remember exactly. Things he could eat and things that helped with the arthritis that would alleviate it and bring it back. But he would go hunting with Rebecca in the winter, and they would go and hunt, and she would shoot and pull the trigger and do all the stuff because his body didn't work. Pretty freaking cool. They would collect syrup, and they would do their sugar boiling and stuff like that they did, and
their maple sugar.
And as two old codgers, they'd kind of just live off the land and find things to do. It's a really interesting deal, and you can tell, especially in their companionship as they're older in their older age, that they had to have a true abiding love for one another. It seemed so to me. So I highly recommend that you go and make sure you read that. But we're skipping ahead here. So Rebecca is gone. And it says many visitors searched Boone out to hear stories of the old days in Kentucky, of the Indians and the Revolution. The Reverend John Mason Peck, who would later publish his biography in 1847, interviewed Boone in December of 1818. Not long after newspapers had mistakenly reported his death. Expecting to meet
they did that back then too, huh?
Yeah.
Fake news.
Expecting to meet a rough, intimidating frontiersman, Peck found instead a countenance, ruddy and fair, and he exhibited the simplicity of a child. His voice was soft and melodious. A smile frequently played over his features in conversation. Peck noticed how solicitous Boone's family was of the old man's comfort, showing great affection for the patriarch. Every member of his family appeared to delight in administering to his comforts, Peck later wrote. As he recounted his life, Boone stressed that though he had experienced hardships and dangers, others had also. He was sociable, communicative in replying to questions, but not in introducing incidents of his own history. He was intelligent, for he had treasured up the experience and observation of more than 80 years. The portrait that emerges from Peck's account is of a wise and resigned old man. He recounted the loss of his lands in Kentucky and Missouri and said that tracts of land had always proved an injury rather than a benefit. The lessons he had been taught had made him indifferent to the affairs of the world. It appears that in his last years, Boone recognized the difference between his life in the woods as a trapper and as a hunter and his life with his family on the frontier and his ventures in the world of business and politics. Yeah, you can't take your money with you. No. Most who met Boone in these later years gave pretty much the same account of the old scout. Boone liked to stress that over the years, his best and most reliable friends had been Indians. In his final years, he seemed to wax more romantic and affectionate than ever toward Native Americans, remembering them as a people of honor and compassion. He had always identified with Indian culture since his youth in Pennsylvania, and in his old age, safe in Jemima's home, he recalled mostly the good things from his many encounters, transactions, and captivities with Native Americans. You could see how, as he was Chautauqua, and he spent all that time as an adopted son, and he was joking and tricking those guys, but at the same time, like, genuinely, I think, appreciative of who they were. You could look back on that, and I truly believe that Boone judged people by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it's very easy to romanticize a dead and gone people because they were there and they had tremendous value and culture and knowledge that they brought to the table. But now they're gone. They don't exist anymore. Their way of life doesn't exist. The way it was is completely gone. You're talking 1820s, In this area of the world, it's gone. And I think, yeah, it's easy to, it's like my wife said, I had a baby. And within months, I had forgot how bad it was, how much it sucked being pregnant and how much it sucked giving birth. Like the moment she had a baby, it was like it all just disappeared and she could only remember the awesome parts.
Yep.
And the same thing like on a hunt, you're like, man, this is rough. You get your, you come out,
sucks.
You get home and all you can remember is all those fun times, but not all the like lonely, struggling, cold, miserable moments that make up a long sojourn in the woods.
I prefer it that way. I prefer to keep on to the good and kind of let the bad dissolve as time goes by. Makes life easier.
Yeah. It says, once Boone said that while I could never, with safety, repose confidence in a Yankee, I never have been deceived by an Indian. Much has been made of the comment over the years, and though the sentiment was probably real, he was forgetting or ignoring the many times his furs had been taken by Indians, many of his family and friends who had been killed by Indians, the torture and death of his son James by Big Jim, the killing of his brother Ned and his son Israel, the kidnapping of Jemima and the Calloway girls, the attempt by Blackfish to take him and 8 or other treaty signers hostage at Boonesboro. But Boone's affection for Indians, especially the Shawnee family that had adopted him, many of whom now came to visit him in Missouri, revealed the part of himself that truly was more in sympathy with the Indian ways than with the white culture. It showed the doubleness in his nature, which had been part of his special character, his difference from the beginning.
I like how he said he'd never been fooled by an Indian, and then good old Robert just rattled them off, dude.
Yeah, you could take that statement though, and like he said, and like Robert Morgan says here, he says, though the sentiment was probably real. So the sentiment being the idea of mostly the Indians had kept their word in a way that many of the white folks that he was around did not. And if you read the years of betrayal of finance and money and politics and stuff that we skipped over, you could see why he could feel that way and long for the simple things. But the Indians lied to him. They did this. They did the trickery. They may not have been as bad, but there were. At the end of the day, I think that humans are humans. The line of good and evil runs through the center of every human heart. This isn't. No one has the no one has the monopoly on goodness.
Mm-hmm.
You're this color and you're over here and you're in this color. So you're all saints, and over here they're all devils.
No, The line of good and evil runs through the heart of every
It's
man.
every person has the potential for it, and it doesn't matter. It transcends color, it transcends class, it transcends race, it transcends everything. You're a human.
There's a big
You're a
difference
human.
between a person and people.
Yeah,
I can trust a person. I don't trust people.
absolutely. So it says in here, many believe that Boone in his final years saw clearly the contradiction of his own life, how his love of nature had led not to a fortune of peaceful hunting with Indians, but to the destruction of the hunting grounds and the Indians that the Indians had preserved for so long. Boone blamed the lawyers and speculators and politicians, calling them Yankees, meaning Americans. Most of the Yankees Boone knew came from Virginia and North Carolina, Yankees being basically the politicians and the rich people. And yet he saw that some of the blame must rest with himself also. If he had been an instrument ordained to settle the wilderness, as Filson said he was, for the Indians, he was an instrument by which they lost their hunting grounds. The contradictions of his life were all too obvious at times to the elderly explorer. The story of Boone is the story of America. From the Blue Ridge to the Blue Grass, from the Yadkin to the Yellowstone, no man sought and loved the wilderness with more passion and dedication. Yet none did more to lead settlers and developers to destroy that wilderness in a few short decades. Richard Slotkin says, he destroys the wilderness and the game by the very acts which reveal his love for them. Few white men of his time came close to understanding and appreciating the Native Americans as well as Boone did, yet few did as much ultimately to displace the Indians and destroy their habitat and culture. A man of peacefulness and goodwill, Boone spent much of his life involved with or witness to border wars with the French, the Cherokees, the British, Shawnees, Loyalists, Wyandots, Osages, and Kansas. I just think in some ways you could say that, but at the same time, Robert, I'm like, he's also a product of his time. You know, he is a man that he was there at that time in that place. Was that going to happen whether Boone was there or not? You know,
Most likely.
I mean, he's pivotal figure for sure, but yeah. Carries on to say there are several mysteries and paradoxes about Boone's last years. A few who talked with him then reported he was bitter, sardonic, that he shunned society and civilization. Though he had always preferred the isolation of the woods, apparently he was even more repelled in his final decade by the corruptions and indignities of the world.
Or old people become reclusive when they get older. I don't know a single
And cranky and crotchety and tired and broken and their brain and things don't work like they used to. And yeah, it's kind of hard to judge.
Leaving the house becomes way harder.
His family noted that seeing a visitor approaching the house, the old man would sometimes take his cane and hobble out the back door to avoid questions and gawking strangers.
Looking at you, Mom.
Many heroic actions and chivalrous adventures are related of me, which exist only in the region of fancy. With me, the world has taken liberties, Boone said, and yet I have been but a common man.
Think so? Would you call him a common man?
No, that's a nice, humble thing to say, but, and you could feel somewhat in that way, because I'm sure he knew other legends that didn't get their story told.
For sure.
I'm sure. One of the abiding mysteries about Boone's last years is the question of whether he ever returned to Kentucky. It says, the daughter of Jacob Boone later said that Daniel never visited her family in Limestone. Just a few weeks before Boone's death, Boone told a neighbor he had kept his promise never to return to Kentucky. He's not happy about how, having done so much to help that land be secured and then just got froze out of it, basically. Yeah. Nathan Boone, one of the most reliable sources about Boone's last years, told Draper that his father never set foot in Kentucky again. The weight of evidence seems to be on the side of the family on the side of the family denials, yet the stories of Boone's return to Kentucky are also convincing.
What did he do in Kentucky when he was supposedly returned?
It is a question no one seems able to resolve. That's in a part we skipped.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Since Boone moved between his children's homes in his later years, it is possible he visited Kentucky. I don't really care about that. Over the past 175 years, let's read this. Biographers have discussed Boone's religious beliefs in a number of ways. Early biographers sometimes portrayed the frontiersman as a devout Christian, almost a missionary bringing the gospel and Protestant culture to the savage wilderness. Some, for instance, asserted Boone never touched liquor, imposing Victorian abstinence on a man not only of the frontier, but of the 18th century. The many accounts of him passing the bottle to companions, as well as the records of his frequent purchases of spirits, give the lie to that pious claim. According to a letter by James Robertson, Boone and all his family were converted by an Episcopalian missionary while living with the Robertson at the Watauga River around 1772. That claim is almost certainly not true. For one thing, there were no Episcopalians until after the American Revolution, when American Anglicans formed their own organization. Still, others would claim that Boone essentially a Baptist. James Bradley would tell Draper Colonel Daniel Boone was a Baptist in sentiment, was not a church member, but was religiously inclined. In fact, we have no record of Boone ever joining a church. It is possible that the disputes and contentions between the Quakers and his father's squire made him reluctant to join any congregation. Boone was a cheerful, peaceable man who avoided quarrels and arguments. He possibly associated church membership with feuds and petty self-righteousness. It was how one lived, not the outward displays of piety, that proved one's character and spirituality. Quote, Colonel Boone was a firm believer in a divine overrule of providence and related many instances in his eventful life where he thought it had been particularly exercised toward him, Stephen Hampstead told Draper. Boone's granddaughter, Delinda, married a Baptist preacher named James Craig, and a number of other Boone relations and friends answered the call to the pulpit. There were sometimes Bible readings and devotions on Sundays at Boonesboro, and of course we know Boone took the Bible as well as other books to read by the campfire on his hunting trips. In 1816, he wrote a remarkable letter to his widowed sister-in-law. October the 19th, 1816. Dear sister, with pleasure, I read a letter from your son Samuel Boone, who informs me that you are yet living and in good health. Considering your age, I write to you to let you know I have not forgot you, and to inform you of my own situation since the death of your sister Rebecca. I leave with Flanders Calloway, but I live with Flanders. None of this is spelled like this. What I've accomplished so far is a feat. Just so you know.
These pioneer people, man,
they
try.
For real.
They try, bless them.
Okay. It says, I live with Flanders Calloway, but am at present at my son Nathan's and in tolerable health. You can guess at my feelings by your own, as we are so near one age. I need not write you of our situation, as Samuel Bradley or James Grimes can inform you of every circumstance relating to our family and how we live in this world. Dude, the spelling here is phenomenal. Like, there's so many extra, like, you could spell circumstance a whole lot of ways. Like some SURCOM stance, circumstance. Rebecca is spelled Rebecca. Live is LEVE. To let you know is LATT.
LAT. That's lat, bro. That's.
I wonder what their accent was like.
True. Didn't think about that.
Informs me has no O in it. It just says INFRMS.
Bro, vowels cost money and they're valuable. Okay, we can't use them all.
Yeah. So anyway, it says we now live in this world, and what chance we shall have in the next we know not. For my part, I am as ignorant. That was a tough one. It says itinerant. Ignorant is what it means. So let me get back up here. It says, I need not write you of our situation, as Samuel Bradley and James Grimes can inform you of every circumstance relating to our family and how we live in this world, and what chance we shall have in the next we know not. For my part, I am as ignorant as a child. All the religion I have to love and fear God, believe in Jesus Christ, done all the good to my neighbor and myself that I can do, and do as little harm as I can, help and trust on my God's mercy for the rest. And I believe God never made a man, never made a man of my principle to be lost. And I flatter myself, dear sister, that you are well on your way in Christianity. Gave my love to all your children and all my friends. Farewell, dear sister.
Whew. You want to take a 5-minute break right there?
Daniel.
That was rough.
So that was in 1816. He wrote that letter to Rebecca's sister after his wife was gone. So I'm sure he missed Rebecca terribly. Miss Sarah Boone. In B, I read a letter yesterday from my sister Hannah Pennington by her grandson Dal Ringe. She and all her children are well at present. That was like the P.S. This letter is of particular interest for several reasons, though its spelling is wild and inconsistent. Thank you.
Validation.
The voice of the man comes through vividly.
Mm-hmm.
One has the sense of an old man who spoke much better than he wrote. What is evident is Boone's humility and simplicity, his affection for his family, and his goodwill toward his fellow man. He admits his ignorance, but his claims for himself, though modest, are significant. He concedes he is childlike, but has tried to do good, or at least little harm. He believes in a God of mercy who honors integrity. It is the letter of a man at peace with himself. There is no hint of bitterness. The many failures and disappointments have left him humble and accepting. Yeah, that's what I take from that too. He believes in a God of mercy who honors integrity. He says, I'm not a perfect man, but I have really tried to be a good person. And I've really tried to limit the bad things and the bad effects on other people. And I've always tried to do right. He does sound like a man at peace in some extent. Like, I don't really know. I'm ignorant to what exactly happens, but I have this faith in the idea that I did everything I could and I couldn't have done a whole lot more. And, I have to give the rest to God. It says Boone often attended services held by Baptists when he was visiting Jemima. He was present at a service preached by Reverend John Mason Peck. It was a time when revivals were sweeping the Missouri region following the period that historians call the Second Great Awakening. We're quite familiar with that. I mean, you're talking 1820. Mm-hmm. But there is an independence and wit in Boone, and the kind we associate with Thoreau. As Thoreau was dying, the abolitionist Parker Pillsbury asked him how the opposite shore might appear to him. One world at a time, the author of Civil Disobedience snapped. Yeah. What's it like? Look, I only can worry about this one right now.
Yeah, for real. Amen.
When the sage of Walden was asked on his deathbed by his Aunt Louisa if he had made peace with God, Thoreau replied, "I did not know we had ever quarreled." When a Baptist preacher named James E. Welsh asked Boone if he had experienced a change in your feelings toward the Savior, Boone fired back, "No, sir. I always loved God, ever since I could recollect." Boone's worship was in secret, and he placed his hopes in the Savior, his son Nathan told Draper. "In his latter years, my father was a great student of the Bible. He was seldom seen reading any other book and fully believed in the great truths of Christianity." Boone had never lost the influence of the Quakers in Pennsylvania. His peaceableness and reticence, his tolerance and ease with other races, his love of fairness seemed derived in part from early contact with the Friends, Quakers. But some thought he was deeply influenced by Indian beliefs also. Timothy Flint said outright he worshipped, as he often said, the Great Spirit, for the woods were his books and his temple, and the creed of the red men naturally became his. You heathen! It's funny, you can't, his mother, had to have a lot of influence. His father, his upbringing as a Quaker, all of that stuff surely was a foundation for him, and but he's a man of many, like he's so fluid, being able to understand and see the world through another man's eyes, and relate and see that person, as a son of God, I assume, essentially. While the Indians had been absorbing many of the teachings of the Moravians and the Methodists and other denominations, men like Boone were assimilating an Indian sense of sacred, animistic wilderness and meshing it all into a single creed of goodwill and respect for others and all life. As mentioned earlier, the ideas and poetry that would be expressed a few decades later by Emerson, Thoreau, and Whitman were already at work in the minds and hearts and the pulse of men such as Boone and William Bartram, who had also been brought up as a Quaker. Probably Boone would have agreed with Emerson when he said, "I like the silent church before the service begins better than any preaching."
Sounds about right.
If the genius of American thought and literature was created from the fusion of New England spiritual zeal and the naturalism of the Enlightenment, it was also deeply informed by the American experience of the wilderness, the great forests and vistas of the spirit, or of the West, the spirit of the frontier men and women and the native hunters and the holy men they encountered, fought with, imitated, and learned from. It says, in his old age, he viewed his relations with the Indians through amber-tinted binoculars and renewed affection. The affection and respect were returned by those who had known him as Chautauqua at Chillicothe. The younger daughters of Blackfish were now old women, but they remembered Boone's kindness to them. Boone visited Indian friends at their homes also. Did Boone have more than just these kids? That's a question. How many half Boone, half Chautauqua, half Blackfish kids are there?
You don't know.
The attempts by some to debunk the myth of Boone as a frontier hero and Indian fighter have actually enhanced the legend of Boone as a man of peace and goodwill. Many a Kentuckian engaged in much more heroic actions with the Shawnee than Boone did. There is slight evidence that, but this is a quote, there is slight evidence that Boone ever knowingly killed an Indian and no record of a violent hand-to-hand combat. Boone seems to have dealt with the Indians by placating them. Even his would-be detractors concede Boone was a man of humanity and peace. He certainly wasn't a coward.
No, the man ran into fights all the time, but he also didn't kill.
He didn't run into many. I mean, he avoided them, but when he got in there, he did his level best. But one of the things that Boone did was, you can't call a man a coward that goes and spends 2 years alone in the wilderness where he might get killed by Indians at any moment. And then,
or lions and tigers,
and
or
then
bears.
how he shakes hands and he just, gets people in and he saves the guys at the Blue Licks and then he runs away. And I mean, there's no coward in these actions. But yes, definitely a man who avoided fighting.
Which is smart. I'm sorry. If you go to any kind of self-defense class, the first thing they're going to tell you is don't fight, don't fight, don't fight. Run, run, run. If you can't, this is what you do.
Yeah. It says he got old.
Weird.
And it says, commenting on reports that he still went hunting in his last years, Boone told Peck, "I would not believe that tale if I told it myself. I have not watched the deers lick for 10 years. My eyesight is too far gone to hunt." In 1816, Boone and Nathan began to build a stone house. Nathan cut the limestone. Every stone cut's different. Yeah, so they built a house out here, middle of nowhere. It says Nathan would help and advise his father, cut walnut logs 3 feet in diameter and hewed beams. They built this house, and it says, after Boone's death, Nathan would say his father had been entitled to Masonic honors, though he had none at his funeral since there were no Masonic lodges left in the district. Though Boone had been initiated into Freemasonry years later, in this one period near the end of his life, Boone worked literally as a mason, helping where he could, sometimes welding the trowel, perhaps mixing the mortar and keeping it wet until used when they built the house. It says, so they built a massive house for his son Nathan as in his old age, and he kind of helped out with that. And then it says, even in the sad years after the death of Rebecca and throughout his long decline, Boone kept something of his dry wit and relish of irony. After he fell ill while hunting with his grandson James Boone in November of 1817 and was taken to the home of Isaac Van Bibber, Nathan was summoned. Assuming that his father had already died, Nathan ordered a coffin to be made while he went to get the body of the old pioneer. "I gave directions before leaving home for a coffin to be made to the funeral, so the funeral might take place immediately upon my return," Nathan said. But Boone had not died. In fact, he had rallied and was able to return with Nathan.
Hey, got a coffin.
And when he saw the coffin had been ordered, Boone was not at all pleased. Made of plain boards, it was too rough and uncouth. For all his modesty and good manners, Boone had a sense of style and dignity.
Did he make his own coffin?
The plain coffin was used for a relative, and Boone ordered a fine coffin made for himself to match the one he had commissioned for Rebecca in 1813. He's like, dude, Nathan, you're so cheap, man. Come on.
That's awesome.
Soon after this event, he gave directions to a cabinet maker in the settlement to prepare a coffin of black walnut for himself, which was done accordingly, and it was kept in his dwelling for several years. Peck would write. But according to Peck, Boone later decided the walnut coffin was not good enough either. He gave that coffin for someone else's burial and ordered an even better one for himself. Another one of cherry was prepared and placed under his bed, where it continued until it received his mortal remains.
Okay, I was going to say, did you get a fourth one? Well, I would not have guessed that Daniel Boone was a coffin snob.
The cherry coffin was a handsome piece of work, and the old man took pleasure in showing it off. Elizabeth Corbin, sister of Daniel Morgan Boone's wife, Sarah, later told Draper, "The coffin appeared marvelously beautiful. The fame of it spread among the simple-minded settlers, and it had exceedingly numerous visitors. Later, the coffin was stored at Nathan's new stone house, but from time to time, Boone would take it out to admire and study. His granddaughter Delinda later remembered that he would rub and polish it up and coolly whistle while doing it. Woo, yeah, look at this baby."
Do you think he hopped in it?
Others said he would lie down in the coffin to show how well it fit him, and sometimes he would take a nap in it, scaring the children.
Yes. Okay, Boone. Oh, yes. 100%. That's me.
Yes. Even as a feeble old man, Boone was still the performer, larger than life. If he had to be an old man in his second childhood waiting for death to claim him, then he would play the role in a way nobody would ever forget. He continued to improvise and expand the role of Daniel Boone, created many, many years before. He had always been able to make himself memorable. His coffin was the finest that could be had, and he was going to enjoy it and be seen enjoying it. No doubt Boone took comfort in making death so familiar. The box he would later rest in was right here now, and he could dust it and rub it with oil. His hands had never been idle, whether scraping steer horn to make a powder horn, oiling his traps, or repairing his rifle. The Reverend Nathan Coons, who visited, reporting, he just always kept his hands going. It sounds like Squire had died in 1815.
Quite a bit before.
About 5 years, yeah. Like almost all men and women who have the opportunity, Boone enjoyed his grandchildren. His curiosity never left him. It says they describe what he looked like. It says among Boone's last noted visitors was a young painter from Massachusetts named Chester Harding. Harding came to Charette to paint Boone's portrait at the very end of his life, finding the old hunter roasting venison on a ramrod in a small cabin behind Jemima's house. The painter asked if he could do a portrait. Boone was hard of hearing and may not have understood the request. He had little experience with portrait painters, but Jemima understood the importance of the opportunity and persuaded her father to overcome his timidity or modesty and sit. The result was the only portrait from his life that exists.
Dang, really?
It's in the book.
Is it a good portrait?
Let me see if I can find it right here and show it to you. Right here. Yeah.
Old man.
I mean, he took liberty, in the portrait, because I'm sure he didn't look that young. He probably looks 50, 60 in this portrait,
I would say that's not an 80-year-old man right there.
No, I don't think so. But it's probably really close. It's funny how his portraits just look English. You know what I mean? They just scream.
Yeah.
I've seen like similar portraits. You know what that portrait reminds me of? Pictures I've seen of Joseph Smith. Like,
yeah,
almost
that side angle view.
It's like the thing they did in the 1820s, 30s, 40s, 30s, where they kind of painted like that. Same with this one here, right here.
Yep.
And that's an anonymous painting, but supposedly of Boone.
Those portraits don't look very much alike.
And then these are nowhere near like. I like this one though. This is one of my favorites. That's when the girls got kidnapped. I want that on my wall. That looks like something that you'd find painted on top of this, some.
You see some
Indian I know. It looks so nefarious. And the girls are like something off the Sistine Chapel.
Okay, I get what she's doing. What is she doing?
The Victorian,
She's fainting off the boat.
It feels sexual a little bit in there. A little predatory and a little dark and good and evil. Anyway, going on, it says, though he was old and frail, in the Harding painting, the powerful presence of Boone comes through in the portrait. No longer the muscular big turtle of his prime, Boone still shows his character and will. Yeah, it does. You look at his eyes, look at his nose, look at his jaw. It's an interesting portrait. It says, goes on, you'll want to get the book. Sometimes family members saw a dove or other bird light at a window, or heard the scrape of wood being planed as if a coffin were being made. If the dying person was very lucky, he just closed his eyes and stopped breathing, and soothing rest closed in or opened out into infinite stillness. The kind of, in the 19th century, people talked about a beautiful death. It was as though one's death was a work of art, something to be crafted, an achievement. The Indians did that too, though. I think people who live a full life when they're old, they're ready to be done. And the regrets are minimal. Like you did the things. What else is there to see and do? You know, your health isn't what it was. You're ready in a way.
Yeah.
You're kind of ready. You're content. You know, I think that's part of the process. And I think the goal is to ever be learning, ever be growing, ever be challenging yourself, ever be improving who you are one time to the next. Be engaged in activities that you find creative, fulfilling, meaningful. And when you spend a life like that, it's not like you're going to avoid tragedy. That's what life is. You're meant to be broken. You're meant to be busted. You're meant to be twisted. You're meant to be, you know, run through the fire. And it's hard, but it's swallowed up, I believe. That what tragedies life brings to you and heartache, it can be swallowed up in a meaningful existence. In trying to reduce the amount of suffering that is in the world by trying to be a person that makes the world a better place. And that starts with improving you as a person, not being an activist and trying to change others. You fix your own self first. It says, on his last day, Boone, who knew he was dying, said, "I am about worn out." The acute burning around his heart was worse than he had felt before. He asked for his coffin to be brought down from the attic, and he touched the polished wood with his cane to reassure himself of its strength. He described the kind of funeral he wanted and reminded them to bury him beside Rebecca on the hill overlooking the bottomlands to the river. A servant shaved the old man, and Jemima cut his hair to suit him. Granddaughter Delinda even brushed her teeth. Boone asked his daughter-in-law Olive, even brushed his teeth.
I was going to say, why do you care about her brushing her teeth?
Boone asked his daughter-in-law Olive, to sing some of his favorite songs. He expressed pleasure in his long life and health, his attempts to do good and not harm others, his faith in the mercy of God. As morning approached, Boone asked for a bowl of warm milk, which he drank with relish. Then all the family members, including the slaves, filed in to say a final goodbye and receive his farewell. He told each one not to be sad, for he had lived a long and fruitful life. As Nathan and Jemima held a hand on either side, he said, "I am going. Don't grieve for me. My time has come." He died just after the sun had risen, September 26, 1820.
Dang.
I mean, how can you ask for much more?
I was going to say, what else was there? Like, I mean, who goes out like that? That was so methodical.
You know what else, too, though? I think people who suffer from cancer, you know, in some ways, I've said this before, Suzanne went through cancer, that cancer is a blessing and a curse.
100%.
Because as hard as it is and what it is, when you know your time, you only got a year. You only got 6 months. People sometimes live it so different. Always they live it different.
You have to.
But the purpose with which they live and the time they have to take in the inventory, the time they have to you know, settle things and say goodbye. It's a lot different than just the sudden snatch of someone and they're gone, you know, which though is a reminder that, you know, to me, this life that Boone led, one of adventure. I mean, I just relate. That's my life. Mm-hmm. Going and doing things, trying to make the world a better place, trying to be creative, trying to bring some small difference in the circle that I'm able to influence, learning things, just continual effort to learn something new, push myself, see what my body and mind and stuff are capable of, push my children, my wife to be better, to me to be better. Like we all, there's this life to engage in and be proactive in, and goals to set for yourself and a difference to make, and adopting responsibility, carrying your cross, trying to be the best person that you can be, tell the truth as much as you possibly can. And when you attempt to do that and you pick up that responsibility, your life just grows in meaning year over year, year over year, year over year. And some time down the road, when you get toward the end, there's, I think, a peacefulness that is just there. But what a example of a life to live, that Boone sets forth here, one to aspire to. It says, Boone's body was carried in his fine coffin to Jemima's house, and a large crowd assembled for the funeral there 2 days later. James Craig preached the funeral in the barn, which was the only building large enough to hold the number who had gathered. In the sermon, Nathan's son-in-law saluted Boone for his explorations and development of the West and for his defense of the settlements. It is not mentioned whether or not any Shawnees attended the funeral. Boone's nephew, Daniel Bryan, later told Draper, Daniel Boone died in the state of Missouri, not owning as much land as would make his grave. The crowd then followed the coffin and an American flag to the hilltop a mile away where Boone was placed in the earth beside Rebecca. The long hunt and pilgrimage to the west had started almost 86 years earlier in Pennsylvania were over. Now there were only memories, stories, and legends. There's still a lot of this book left, but that's where we're going to end this series. We're all going to die. That's coming. And what's across the river is the next adventure. What that tells me, though, is for now, what my heart says is to live the best version of my life that I can. And seeking adventure, trying to be a good person, all those things, that's what's in the path. And that means, preparing day in and day out now in various ways to be the sort of person. You can't be a courageous person. You can't be a kind person. You can't be a person possessing humility overnight. It's a
lifelong.
It's a daily battle. It's a process. And I heard Jordan Peterson say one time, the end of your, be the sort of person that when your father passes away, that you're a blessing to everyone in the family and to your father or your mother or someone you care about, that you're there to help them get through it or help everyone get through it. You can't be a pillar of strength if you didn't build yourself into that. You can't be somebody who charges in and protects kids in a school shooting if you didn't build yourself into that brave person, into that person willing to put their life on the line in that moment so you don't falter, so that you risk it all and you do the thing. You'd rather die than fail. That doesn't just happen. You don't just get there. That is a deliberate forging of a character. And if you want to be somebody that can do the right thing or special things that take courage and integrity, you have to forge yourself into that now by living little by little by little in a certain way to do it. Otherwise, you're a hedonistic coward and you serve yourself. And at the end of the day, when all is said and done, there's no meaning in that at all. So, there you have it, folks. The end of this series, Boone, a biography by Robert Morgan. Incredible story. The next series we have a couple of books we're going to dive into. Probably, I'm not going to say what book's next. I'm not going to say what book's next.
It's a good one.
Because I want to read into it a little bit more before I decide which one. I suppose it doesn't really, they're all good. We have 3 or 4 to choose from, but I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I hope you guys got a lot out of this story. I hope you learned a lot about America and have a newfound, if you didn't already, have a newfound appreciation for those who came before us, what they went through, the nuances that make up the world. It's not as black and white as we all want to make it be. Humans are humans, and all capable of making mistakes and doing good, doing evil. Whether you're, regardless of your background or your class or your color. So with that, we're going to wrap up the show. Hope you like it. Leave us a comment in the comments section, like and subscribe to our channels. That's always helpful. Leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts, I should say. And yeah, we'll try to get to those comments. We try to read all of them. We appreciate the engagement, and we're looking forward to the next series. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one. All right, folks, I hope you're enjoying the Dueling Pistols podcast. If you like it, do us a favor and share it with a friend. Help us get this thing to grow a little bit bigger. Tell your dad, your mom, your brother, your sister, your buddy, your uncle.
Go to
your
contacts,
grandpa.
hit select all, send.
Just sell it. Just share it with a friend of yours, somebody, and help us spread the word about the show. Thanks for supporting us. We'll catch you on the next episode.